Kelly Brogan, MD, welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to finally have you on. I have been following you here for at least the last year and a half, and your content has resonated so much with me and my team. I have four executives on my team that are all women. They're all badasses. Three of them, two of them are still pregnant. One of them just had a baby. So we've
Oh,
been
wow.
through just leadership and the feminine and honoring the feminine and working in the masculine and feminine together. And so I'm excited to kind of dive into where you're at now. I think your journey is a beautiful one and a story that I think many people can relate to just through my own interactions with a lot of women. And so we'll jump right in. Just to create context for our conversation, can you give us a little background on you? I don't want to spend a whole lot of time there because you've done a lot of different podcasts, but just for my listeners that maybe aren't familiar with you, just as a primer, you're an MIT graduate, so obviously very smart, intellectual, and that's clear in just how you articulate. Sounds like you were a card-carrying member of the feminist movement for a bit. And
Several cults. I joined
uh,
several cults in my my life
so
journey, for sure.
that's fun. And you had an issue with masculinity, it sounds like, at some point, and the patriarchy. Can you kind of just create some context for
Mm.
that and then where you are now and what that transition looked like?
Sure. I'll do my best to nutshell this, because, I tend to fall in love with iterations of my heroine's journey, and I could go on and on. But the universal dimensions of my path, I think, are most germane here, and that is that I was raised. Well, maybe it's relevant that I was raised by an Italian mama, so I'm a second generation gal, and I was, you know, conditioned to perform, to succeed, to achieve. I had a 4.0 my entire life, and I really came to understand the weapon that is my mind, and I learned how to use it. And when I say that, what I mean is that I learned how to slice and dice anyone who might confront me, who might represent any sort of a threat. And I particularly brought this to bear in my relationships with men in my life. So, men in my family, boyfriends, different kinds of romantic relationships. And of course, that then extended into the collegial world and entrepreneurial world where, I derived a sense of safety from my reputation and the sense that I knew I induced in others that I was not to be fucked with. So it seemed like everything was going just fine. I decided to become an MD, specifically a psychiatrist, actually, after I worked a suicide hotline at MIT. And I really felt like a missing puzzle piece was inserted because I was not aware that I had so little emotional mastery, right? Like I was so intolerant of my own emotional range
Hmm.
that, right? Because I was like super sarcastic, super snarky, like always had the last word, like a smart ass, right? I'm also from New Jersey, so I have like that sass just to layer in, with the Italian and Irish, and it was just like a cauldron of defensiveness, really. So anyway, I worked this hotline, and I developed the sense that we've cracked the code of human behavior and human suffering. There's no problems because all you need is a psychiatrist, and you just get somebody who's in distress to a psychiatrist. They're going to get them on meds, and all will be well.
Yeah.
And I positioned myself as the link between the person in distress and the solution. And that looks altruistic, right? Like that looks like, oh, here I am, volunteering my time, helping people. But what I was probably really crystallizing for myself was my own incapacity to be with another's distress. And I think that's why I became a doctor. I actually think it's why a lot of
Hmm.
people become healers and physicians and clinicians, is because we need to have an answer, right? So I would call that like an immature masculine uh, problem solving reflex, right? Like habit, compulsion, even. And so I became a psychiatrist, but as you mentioned, I was always a feminist. So big believer that I could show the world that I could do what men can do bleeding.
Hmm.
And I I had never really met a man that I fully respected. never really met a man who I thought didn't need my direction, right? Who
Mm.
I couldn't give some tips on how to live his life better and what to do to solve his problems, right? And and so I really started to feel like the lack of utility for men in the world, right? Like, what do I really need them for? Um, and this
That was super
what
fulfilling, I'm sure, right?
yeah, yeah. Well, that works. It's a wonderful thing to bring to romantic relationships,
Yeah.
and because of that, it really went covert, right? So like that whole very real field of belief for me, would have left me single and, unfucked. So that wouldn't have worked for me. So I needed to like sort of put lipstick on it, literally and figuratively. So I fell in love with my first husband and the father of my children, and I hadn't had any impulse to have a child. Like I was like, pro abortion, like just why bother, like ruining your, so just so in this very pragmatic, I was an atheist at the time, very pragmatic worldview. And it was, after falling in love with him that I had that very natural, um, sort of impulse, I guess,
Is it
rise to my awareness.
when is that in your book you talk about honoring your biological impulse, which I want to get
Exactly.
to, is that what you're referring
Yeah, exactly. And it was, the ultimate one, which is to have this man's child, and so I approached a lot of my it's just a funny thing. I had two natural births. I have two daughters. And, with my first experience, I had a natural birth, not because I was like, obviously, some kind of like earth mama, hippie trying to like commune with the goddess or whatever. I
to?
did it because I was a know-it-all.
You
And
want to prove that you could.
yeah, to prove that I could, but also through the medical literature, like I researched and questioned every single thing. I was initially with an OB, and then I ended up with a really what they call a
Right.
midwife. Yeah, exactly. I ended up with one of those because I was researching, because it was my specialty at the time to work with pregnant women. I was researching, episiotomy and fetal monitoring and all these induction, all these things. And I found that this is not an evidence-based field of practice. And so that is literally why I had an intervention-free birth. However, it would be about 10 months postpartum that my heroine's journey would really begin. And that was when I was diagnosed with really my first ever like medical issue. It's called Hashimoto's thyroiditis. It's
Yeah.
endemic to the postpartum population. And I didn't want to take a prescription, even though I couldn't have been more pro pharma. I mean, I was just all about, the magic pill.
Why? Why didn't you want to? I found this very interesting. And I remember the story you were telling about sitting across from a pregnant woman being pregnant and
Yeah.
not, and you're like, I wouldn't take this shit as you're prescribing it to you. Why didn't you want to take a prescription? I mean, that was the world you grew up in,
Yeah.
right? Is the world you subscribed to, at least invested in your education in. So why? What was where would you say that urge or that story or that voice came from that said, I don't want to do this? What was that?
I I think it's the role that cognitive dissonance plays in our maturation and our individuation, right? So I had these two parts of me, the part that says, conventional medicine knows best. Anybody who questions it will be punished, right?
Mm.
Which is essentially mommy and daddy know best, right? It's an idealization of this parentified system. And then I had this part of me that said, no, I'm gonna do it my way, right? Like, I'm not walking a prescription down to CVS every month, fuck that, like, I'm not signing up for that. Like, maybe it was sacred laziness, like, I don't know, but I was not I felt trapped by it. I felt constrained, and I felt the shadow of my authority issues really, like, bumping up against that, pledge of allegiance I would have had to make for life to this system, right?
Would
So
you,
it was always underneath, but I wasn't aware of it until that moment.
you've used the word awareness now a few times, which is exciting because this is my whole field of study. But would you say, correct me if I'm wrong, would you say that you felt like you were better than that, better than taking medication? Like
Yes.
you were superior to that, even though that's what you were prescribing to others.
Yes, and I would actually track as a through line in my personal development, that sense of superiority, I mean, it's tracked through all of my relational challenges in life, all of my painful breakups, a lot of my work that I've done healing the sister wound and relating to other women. This sense of superiority, as I'm sure most people listening know, and you obviously know, is it's a thinly veiled sense of inadequacy. It's the narcissistic inflation that is the hallmark of victim consciousness, right? So it was absolutely there. It was, I was better than apparently all my patients, which was not a conscious thought, but I could prescribe to them all day. But for me, there had to be, a path that I could forge for myself. And so anyway, that was the beginning of my process. And I'm sure you've seen too in your own journey, whenever you're at this crossroads where you are asked to give up something you thought that you could never live without, it's like, I'll do anything, but don't ask me to do this, kind of a negotiation. Um, there is always an alignment with the heart's like pure desire that becomes more available on the other side of it. But man, the negotiating that I've done at every one of those crossroads has been epic. I'm even in the middle of one now, which, relating to my career, which we could talk about. But at that point, I was being asked to exit the cult, and I say that kind of tongue in cheek, but also it actually conforms to the definition because there are consequences. I was kicked off of 2 faculties when I started to teach, very like sweet little, sweet little Kelly back then with her PowerPoints, just teaching about, fish oil and, the problems with gluten. Because basically I changed my diet and I put my illness into remission, full remission. I mean, it's been 15 years and I'm still, yeah, I didn't even think about it.
Which is
So
incredible because the mainstream idiopathic way would say that's not possible. It's
right,
just something you live with for the rest of your life.
right. And those cases are never studied. I've made something of a sport out of publishing these cases, that have come out of my practice and program in the literature just because they're not there and I know they exist. I mean, all of these anomalous cases are out there and people, aren't
There's,
encouraged to
there's so
study
many.
them or explore them.
Yeah, and sorry to interrupt you. There's a few things I wanted to get into with this. But I want to go back before we get too far away from your origin story. You referenced being Italian, Irish, East Coaster, I would say, New Jersey, in which you got the vibe. Slightly New York, though. I catch more New York than.
Yes, I spent most of my life in New York,
Okay,
actually.
that makes
Yeah.
sense. That makes sense. You don't have the twang at the end of the communication, but there's like energetically, I can see that. You mentioned your mom. What was your relationship with your father like?
Mm. So I would say that, like so many women, I had the experience of being seen by my dad for my achievements, right? For my doingness. And, I just had a coaching call with a gal and she was talking about, how her dad was really her biggest supporter around her athleticism. Most athletics require a disavowal of the feminine body, right? Like for women, right? Like to be good at most sports, you have to be more like a boy. Okay. So the
Yep.
experience, that I had in a lot of ways without, getting into any unnecessary details is of like being more of a son, I would say. I mean, to this day, we talk about mortgages and cars and like money and investments, and I can talk all that stuff, but it wasn't like I had a lot of experience being asked how I felt about something, being, celebrated for things like, you know, how it feels when I enter a room or like, any of my creative expression or just my beauty even honestly. And it was like as if my entire feminine dimension didn't exist. And
Huh.
that's only because that's how he relates to his own, right? Inner dimension and how he was taught. I mean, my parents both come from extraordinarily, as I would narrate it, challenging upbringings, and have really been in the survival rungs of Maslow's hierarchy for most of their lives. So
And you said you're second gen, implying that they actually immigrated from Italy,
my mom.
immigrated from Italy, dad from Ireland, or
Yeah,
he.
but he's more generations back. So he's
Yeah.
American, Irish American. Yeah.
So you would say, I don't want to put words in your mouth. You would say that you had a good relationship with your dad, but the way that he related to you was very much in a masculine context and kind of slapped that on top of you. And in some ways, you felt like you were treated more like you were a son than a daughter, which you're not, you didn't say this, but so correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like you didn't really honor the feminine in you. It provoked almost a masculine way to connect with him. Correct me if
I
I'm.
would say that's probably true of my experience in general, right? So not even specific to him, like my experience with both my parents. Um,
Hmm.
and again, without getting into like compromising details of other people's privacy, I had um, alcoholism, and I don't use that word because I don't believe in pathological diagnoses and DSM labels. However, it is a pattern most of us can recognize, and has played a very significant role in my family structure and experience, and just is threaded through, both sides of my family. So anybody who's grown up with that kind of exposure and experience and influence knows that it comes with all sorts of codependency inducing factors. And it's funny, I actually went to an Al-Anon meeting for the first time. I've been to many AA meetings because in my upbringing, I started to go to AA meetings, and uh, I went to an Al-Anon meeting, which I'd never been to, weirdly, and just recently in New York. And it's funny, I was with like my girlfriends, and we've all started to look at like how this has impacted our relational patterns. Because when you're in a lot of the sort of spiritual self-help, personal development, like introspective, psychotherapeutic worlds, like the whole construct of AA and Al-Anon and everything it offers, I think can feel a little bit like trite, I'm beyond that. I want like deeper shadow work. Like, let me really dig in. Anyway, it's very fucking humbling because I'm in this room with these people, like, here I am, thinking I'm in some special, again, that superiority, special position to know more as a psychiatrist, and also somebody who's done a lot of personal work in the inner realms. And we were all talking about the same exact thing, which is how painful a life it is to imagine that you know better how somebody is supposed to live.
Hmm.
Like, it's like literally the source of all suffering. And that is the codependent credo, right? Like, let me help you do you right, right? Like, and like, let me give you these little crumbs, so you give me some crumbs back. That's the agreement, right? And it's a covert exchange where we look like, we're just here to help, we're just here to support, and we have all the clarity and all the answers, and it's just a matter of like getting someone else to see. So my shadow lives under the banner of I will get you to see. And I mean, I literally last week, I got an email related to my book publication process, which has been a little bit of a shit show. Um, and this email was so provocative. Like, it had all caps in it. Like, it was just a whole thing, right? And it was just very, very triggering for me because there were assertions in there that weren't accurate. And it invoked this familiar experience that I've had of men in the world where, you know, they failed to fulfill a contract, let's say, and they knew it. And they preemptively would like take no responsibility, and then blame and gaslight me about like it being my fault. Okay. So it's like a whole thing I've attracted many times in my lifescape. And anyways, I got this email, and I'm really good at penning the retort. Like, within 90 seconds, I could cut a bitch. Okay. So like it's a skill that I've honed over it's not even a skill. It's just like an adaptation. And
Right.
in literally 90 seconds, I could like destroy this guy's reputation. Like, but with facts, like I have like a Rolodex, right? All the whole thing. Um, I have found in my life, since I attracted into my field my mentor, Dr. Nicholas Gonzalez, that it really serves me to have elder men, like father figures in my field. right? Like, of course I have like female coaches and all the stuff, but I have a friend, Tom Cowan, who's a colleague also, and he, I consult him pretty much about everything. Like he's like my chief advisor, and and I consulted him about this. He reminded me, like it's an old way. It's an old way, like you can put down the sword and find some playfulness about this. And I was like, oh, right. I wrote a whole fucking book about this. Like that's right. You're right. And I didn't send the email. And I can't tell you, it felt
Did you
so,
write it?
yeah, well, I wrote it, but I
Yeah.
didn't send it.
Yeah. It
And
could be cathartic in and of itself, right? You express
it
it.
was, but oh, it was painful not to send it because then I'm letting this guy's distorted reality exist out there. How can I do that? Right. Like, and that's the thing, right? Like, if we can, as so-called codependents, like begin to train the muscle that says, your journey is yours, your reality is yours, your experience is yours. Like, you are responsible for that. And I'm just going to stay over here in my lane. I'm going to stay here in my lane. I'm going to retain my energy. I'm not going to take the bait. So a lot of, my more recent relational work has been on like literally that, which I know is entrained in a lot of us in childhood.
And I'll be sensitive around the topic of your parents, but I'm trying to get to something, which is how is it, what conditions, and I think we've hit on some of them, but what were the conditions that led you into seeing the world the way you did with sounds
Mhm.
like not a lot of trust for men, using intellectual superiority to protect your heart by creating a defense. Your mind was your defense, your wall to the world. What what led you to believe that that was the path?
Mm.
That was what was going to protect you and save you. And we're getting into codependence, but I'm kind of wanting to work
Yeah.
backwards to figure out, because I think there's a lot of people that can relate to that. It's like
Yeah.
awareness is, for me, it's like, well, you believe these things because you thought they served you.
Yeah.
So what were the conditions that led you to believe that showing up in this world would ultimately serve you?
My mom was a stay-at-home mom, and she's a very bright, very sharp woman, and she did not enjoy an education. I mean, like she didn't go to college or anything like that. And also remember, she left the motherland. Like, I don't know if you've spent time in Italy, but it ain't the same as Brooklyn, where she grew up. And there has to be some kind of make it worth it, kind of dynamic that can come through these extensions that children can become, right? Because this is a phenomenological reality, like second generation kid, like you become a lawyer, a doctor, like what is that about, right? So
Yeah.
that extension where you have to reflect the egoic structuring that is needed, right? The unlived life, that your parents sacrificed, kind of a thing. So, I was encouraged from very early on to always be financially self-sufficient, right? So some of
By your parents or their
my
condition?
mom, by
Okay.
my mom. And, she just would tell me I'm like the smartest thing ever and I can do this. And like, I need to make sure that I'm always self-sufficient and I, can support myself, right? Because she's not in that position. As a dependent housewife, right? Who is not a career woman. And she felt like this was the opportunity I think she was giving me. And so that I've got myself, I got it. I don't need help, kind of a thing, um, has persisted through to this day,
Yeah.
and I am only honestly now, Sebastian, like feeling the consequences, I guess, of having prioritized my own providership for my entire adult life. Like I started working when I was like 10 at a bagel store in New Jersey. Okay. I have worked my whole life, my entire life. Postpartum, I took 3 weeks off and I was probably like thinking about my patients the whole time. Um, and even though I have an extraordinary business, where you are one of 2 committed hours I have all week. Okay. So it's not like I'm like slaving away at the computer. And, I have built this, okay, over, 15 years. But nonetheless, it's not like I I'm working very hard the way I used to when I was like working in the hospital and then my private practice and then commuting and all of that. But the energy, as a provider, I would imagine the energy that I offer to my purpose and my mission has been principal, right? Like it's been chief, it's been primary. It has come before my kids. It has come before, my marriages. It has come before even my friendships, like everything. And none of this is conscious. Like this was all really something I've just started to acknowledge. And so when I talk about and speak to other women about the bait and switch of feminism, I feel like, I've reached this summit. I have a very successful business. I don't work very hard, quote unquote, right? I am able to be here with my kids. I, am credentialed. I financially support myself and them. We, do whatever we want to do, et cetera. I feel like I've reached this summit, right? And like I'm up here being like, ladies, turn back. It's not up here. Like literally abort mission, turn around and go back down the mountain because whatever the fuck we thought was up here, the fulfillment, the sense of safety, the finally like I've got me in a way that no woman in my mother line ever could, and isn't this amazing? It's bereft, it's hollow. And that's why most of my personal work in these past years has been on the resentment, this like bubbling resentment, this disappointment. And it would come out, in little ways. Like again, in my business, like a vendor would be 2 days late in delivering something, and I'd be like, oh, like it's just like a chronic thread throughout my life. And I see this. I see women overwhelmed. I see them numb. I see them wired and tired and just nowhere near where we were promised. And of course, I knew this, right? In my practice, I saw, women who were multiply medicated. And I know the stats on 1 in 4 women of reproductive age being on psychotropic drugs. Like we are not okay. We're not doing well. Can we acknowledge that? And we can finger point all day long, right? Like we can blame and try to apply more of the same, control and fear-based tactics to getting men to subdue themselves, apologize, and serve our needs. However, I'm not sure that we are really any closer to what our deepest longing is, which is for an experience of exhale and the play and creativity and
Mhm.
and pleasure, that are allowed to exist when that's in place.
So unintentionally, we would say we are creating a world we do not want in the belief and reactionary belief to moving away from a world we thought we didn't want.
Yeah, it's a zero-sum game, and it always looks this way, right? Because whenever you imagine that eradicating and triumphing, you know, is that a verb? Over, s something that you have decided is bad and wrong is
Yeah.
going to be your portal to fulfillment.
Yeah.
You enter in that whack-a-mole, right? Like, and it just ends up cropping up in another place or in another way.
So I teach from a principle-based kind of philosophy, and kind of a first principle thinking, the organizing principle. When we react to error, we almost always cause more error. So I
Mhm.
don't think there's anyone that's going to look back at the last 1,000 years and think that women were treated well, or that there weren't massive issues with how the patriarchy was showing up. But the reaction to it hasn't been one, in my opinion, one of healing and bringing the masculine and feminine together. It is what I hear you describing, which is women thinking in order to be influential, in order to be powerful, they have to jump into the same realm as the masculine and play in the masculine space or play in that masculine energy, which is for so many reasons. And I will disclose easily 60% of my coaching clients are middle-aged women who are crushing it in their careers and totally unhappy. And
My
are like,
ladies.
yeah, they're like, yeah, which is why I was so excited to get you on. It's like, I suck at relationship. Some of them want to have babies and they're like, just, they're so blunt about where they're at in their life. And they're like, I don't understand how I got here.
I get it.
Um,
So
but
get
it's,
it.
to me, when I look at that, it's like the feminine and I think in the Western culture, we've lost femininity. It's like it's such a men respond to femininity. They're innately, I think you called it a natural contract. And I want to get into that a little bit because I think it's beautiful, but the masculine responds to the feminine. It does not respond as a whole to the masculine. It's literally a turnoff to the masculine to interact with the masculine, even in feminine form. And so it creates all sorts of disconnect. And I think we're seeing and I don't blame women or feminism at all, but we are seeing the impact on the masculine as a result. I have young men, so it's a boys really in their 20s who are asking what it is to be a man and
Yeah.
are
Yeah.
confused about, is it wrong to be assertive? Is it wrong to be confrontational? Is it wrong to be confident? Is it wrong to be strong? Like this is, and it's this cultural impact of this message that's being sent that I don't really think that there is an evil mastermind behind all this that knows what they're doing, as some would like to project. I think it's just humanity being human. And we react to error very often. If you study history, we're not terribly bright. We think we're a lot smarter than we are. And we make these decisions reactionary, thinking this is what's going to solve the problem. And very often we treat the symptom of the problem, not actually the problem, which in many cases only makes the problem or the wound worse down the line. So here we are, where women are being asked to be men. And I have a lot of women who will DM me or reach out to me and say they're living in a world. Oh,
There he is, always involved.
they're living in a world where they believe they're supposed to compete with men,
Yeah.
masculine world. And in all fairness to women, that isn't a fun place to be, because a woman is never going to be a better man than a man is. And it takes them out of their power and out of their essence. So how did you, I mean, you talked about one of your first books, picture of a blowing up a pill. I didn't read the book, but I thought the cover was hilarious. You took out a $2 million life insurance policy, went hard because you were pissed off and realizing you've been lied to. And there's a couple of institutions here, right? There's, as you're calling it, the cult of feminism, but there's also the medical world, which is interesting. There's so many ways we could go with this, and I don't know how much time we have here, but it's also really interesting that you alluded to, you just simply started talking very lightly about preventative medicine, and you were kicked out of two different faculties for that. Is that correct?
Yeah. I
And
was,
that's concerning to me, right? That like the medical field doesn't subscribe to preventative medicine as a whole. It's still very hard to find. And very often I have many friends who are doctors, and they spend very, very little time studying preventative medicine at all. It's all about treating symptoms, and sometimes the underlying problem, but also mitigating symptoms of the problem. So that to me is a huge concern. And I think setting a stage here, we're living in an interesting time where, from a historic standpoint, at least in this millennia, I can't point to another time like this. I think we've done this at least 3 times as humans, but in this millennia, where we are challenging every major institution all at the same time. Right, we're not really super pumped on religion right now as a culture, finding our own way. We distrust science more than we have in a very long time. We distrust the medical field more than we have in a very long time. We're questioning the merits of capitalism. In the US, our governmental political system is in complete disarray, and there's a lot of populist behavior going on there. It's like, where do we go? The institution of marriage is being challenged and changed, and less people are getting married. More and more people are looking at different kind of relational constructs. Like, I can't think of one institution that, as Americans or Western society, that we have found strength and purpose in the past that isn't being challenged, which to me is exciting, because that is usually always the indication of massive transition, where a lot of these things will probably get recalibrated and will come back to a balance, but they've gotten really out of whack. The interesting thing, though, is that they've happened all at the same time. Right? It's like so where do we go to find our sense of purpose, meaning, security? And I think these are the questions that are getting asked a lot. And my belief is, we come back together, and the magic of the feminine and the masculine working together to create the world we really want. right? And in order to do that, we got to bring into our awareness the wounds and the stories we have of the other and of self, so that we can reintegrate as a whole. And that we are at most potent as humans when the masculine and the feminine are in the sacred dance and they're playing off of each other, right? And I would say, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, and I have a few questions. I would say the masculine serves as the container that the feminine expresses itself in, right? And I would describe the feminine with a lot of things, but I would potently say it is both magic and chaos. And there's a beauty to that that the masculine yearns for. So what, first of all, before I ask the question, what do you think? Do you think that's a fair frame, or would you correct that, or say anything different around that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair frame. I look at it. I've actually spoken with people, including on my own podcast, who see it totally differently in terms of who is containing whom. And that's how I see it, because I believe, I mean, there's just so much I could say, in response. So I'll appreciate your specific questions to, sort of reel me
Wherever
in.
you want. I
I mean, this will be a 5-hour podcast, but it took me a long time to acknowledge that I am in a vulnerable body and that a man can kill me with his bare hands if he feels like it on a Tuesday. And not that is ever something I've reckoned with in my lived experience, but to acknowledge that that has been a white noise beneath the surface of my incarnation, is to acknowledge my covert, my hidden motivations for so much of what I do to secure this surrogate sense of safety in the world. I will never, in my opinion and from my perspective, be in a position physically to feel that I am no longer vulnerable to a man who finds me distasteful, okay, in any way, shape, or form, who disagrees with me, who finds however I'm showing up to be at odds with, what he thinks is right in the world. So what does that mean? That means that I have to hone this other defensive skill set, which I've referenced, where I get really good at shaming men. And again, not on some grand scale, but I know that my weapon is to destroy his reputation, for example. And I get really good at my own independence. I get really good at making sure I am aware of how right I am about how wronged I am. So you referenced like my first book, A Mind of Your Own, with the exploding pill on the cover, and the through line in my work, because that was not about feminism for one sentence. It was just about health and what it is to reclaim your health from the system. And the through line is my appreciation for this field of victim consciousness, right? Like what that's actually all about. It's a whole vibe. And so when you say like, oh, the medical system should, you didn't say exactly this, but should, include more of a focus on preventive medicine, like I am not, I don't think so, right? Like I actually think it's perfect the way it is, because when you go to a conventional doctor, you need to triangulate against something. That's the only way you've ever known to find your power, right? So remember that stupid email example, right? If I'm going to triangulate against that guy as bad and wrong and recruit my evidence for why he is, I'm entering into that field. And that's the most power I can feel. I don't get to feel the power of my existence just being okay without needing to validate, right? Without needing the evidence. If you feel like you're broken and damaged, to go to a doctor who says, yeah, you're right, you are, here's the name for it, and here's the pills you can take to be a good patient and manage this situation that is you, okay? You get all sorts of benefits from that, right? You get to, just think about,
Identity, meaning,
yeah,
purpose.
and I would invite any woman to consider the last time that you felt really unwell and you got to tell people that you felt unwell. What happens, right? They're softer with you. They're nicer to you. They're more compassionate. They're more accommodating. They're more supportive. You get to say no without having to say actually just a no. There are all sorts of needs that are met by and through triangulation against yourself in the form of the collusion with the medical system in this way. So I have come to find that anytime I'm in a bad and wrong, like I'm saying that that's the bad way, which I have done, trust me. I'm still in the same field, right? So I was an activist for 10 years, hardcore. And in my activism, you could say I helped many people, and many people have credited me with all sorts of things, saving their lives and whatever. But in the end, I was perpetuating that which I was fighting,
For
because
sure.
my energy was that zero-sum game energy. I was out for blood. I was in my villain, right? Where I was using my own victimization to fuel my perpetrator energy, right? And to say, like, I will get you, right? Like pharma or whatever. And, when I saw, oh my God, it's the same thing with, feminism. It's the same thing with our
Any wound. I
any
mean,
zero-sum game, but yeah, specifically this man-woman relating crisis that we're in, where um, I don't use the term patriarchy, but if I did, I would probably describe myself as, somebody who is supportive of patriarchy. I actually do believe men are leaders. I believe they are supposed to be the leaders. I believe that they have a very specific role in society. They always have. Actually, in my research, there's never been a matriarchy. All of these new age concepts that a lot of women who are still really hurting and really scared um, are, sort of like tossing around the internet, to substantiate the time for matriarchy and the time for us to have ours and the time for us to, like, you know, um, assume all of these leadership positions because we can do it better. It took a lot of fucking humility for me to recognize that actually, there are absolutely men in the world who can do it way better than I can. And I better only ever partner with those men, right? Like with the men that I can look at with that pure respect and trust to lead. Because, that is the contract. You reference these contracts. And I have done a deep dive studying marriage as a covenant, as an institution. And I have found that it's been under siege, right? It's been under siege for a reason. So I am definitely more on the side of these were orchestrated agendas. I don't know that that's more where I land, like who's funding these movements that seem like grassroots, women just getting together, disenfranchised or whatever, sexual liberation, the new age. And, we don't have to look beyond Marxist doctrine to find that, militant feminism and all of these associated ideals advocate for a society without sex roles, right? That's actually the path to fulfillment. And when you don't have sex roles, you actually are recruiting the state to perform those roles, right? We call it subsidized daycare. We call it welfare checks that surpass what, a man in a lower socioeconomic environment could possibly provide his woman. So his providership is relegated to, they call it bureaucracy, is relegated to the state. And we end up in this chaotic place where we end up relying on the government really to solve our problems. And that's the sort of divide and conquer dialectic that is referenced whenever we find ourselves pointing a finger. So that same victim consciousness zero-sum game, pointing a finger at somebody who needs to change in order for things to be okay. Well, I have found that if I stay in my lane and I focus on what it is that I have control over in my own space, and I look at my own deep fears and the associated defenses, I look at what I am judging, what I'm being judged for as a portal through which I can meet dimensions of myself. Like, I don't need to be bothered, with what's happening on the grand scale. And I can then have the capacity, which I only developed, over the past couple of years, to see, oh, marriage serves women. It serves women. It serves children, and it serves men. How does it serve men? Well, they have a very different, and I just did a podcast on this, talking about a book called Men and Marriage. As a man, you know more about this than I do, but they have a very different sexual cycle, right? So like if left to their own devices, they have a cycle that involves like chase and conquest and variety and the nomadic experience, right? Of like gangs and hunters, right? So to tame a man, how and why would a man ever want to be a civil member of society? Well, because he finds that his, you know, futurist oriented prospects for immortality, he finds his meaning, he finds his role through a woman's womb. And he finds his experience of being needed and having a purposeful life through that union. And so we get a man then serving that woman and those children and society, and he gets to express himself, because the stats on married men and the way that they perform, you know, this in terms of wealth and capital and financial success, their addiction and you know, associated struggles are grossly minimized. Like, they just have better lives. It's actually like extraordinarily
Yeah, the
strong.
data is pretty clear on that one.
Yeah.
Hard to
So
argue.
yeah. So, like, what does that mean then? It means that it makes sense that we would have been brought to this place. And again, no accidents. It's all part of the grand design. No victims here. But we would have been brought to this place where women have been masculinized. Men, as you alluded to, have in many ways been feminized, right? So for
Creating
many.
an androgynous species
Mhm.
that I don't think anybody's going to want.
Yeah, but there is a whole, you know, there are philosophies that support, you know, that being the way, right? This neutralization of the human, right? One religion, one race, one gender, polygenders, or whatever you want to say, and the pendulum swing back to a woman's essence, a man's essence, and what comes through the complementarity of the two, and what becomes possible in terms of the role that a woman has as a mother, right? So as somebody, I have a, you know, teenagers now, and um I don't think I was able to admit to myself, because of the shame that kept me from ever even really looking, that I never prioritized my role as mother, you know, with my children. I
It's a
prioritized many other things.
it's
And
a common it's a common behavior of martyrs, activists, um, some leaders, where their mission, very often, I say it this way: that which you judge judges you back. And very often, you alluded to, if we stay in victimhood long enough, we will become the perpetrator.
yeah. Oh,
Um,
sometimes quickly. Sometimes it could just be a weekend.
to
Doesn't
be
take
sure,
long.
but that we don't deal with victimhood. There's a difference between being a victim in the moment and staying in victimhood. But if we stay in victimhood, it is only a matter of time before we become the perpetrator. And in doing so, we simply perpetuate whatever the cycle of destruction that we are participating in is.
Yeah.
And that's how you, I like to say it this way: if you offend the mind, you reveal the heart. It's easy to tell where somebody's coming from by challenging their mind, right? Because if you say something that offends their mind, what they actually think will come out, and like, and that is where you're coming from. You're not looking for equality, you're looking for dominance.
Mhm.
That is not the same thing. And I don't, there's so many different ways I want to go with this conversation now, but when it comes to agendas, I don't have a hard time believing that there are groups of people out there and there are institutions that have ideals that they're trying to propagate into the world. Um, I think I've always enjoyed a quote by Napoleon. He said, "Never interrupt your enemy when they're making a mistake." And you take the word enemy out and say opponent or somebody who sees
Yeah,
the.
yeah. I like that.
But
Yeah.
I think what we're seeing right now, and I love it, is the fruition of ideals that do not line up.
Yeah.
And it will correct itself because it's becoming more and more evident that it didn't work and it doesn't work. We're in a mental health crisis. In Western society, arguably, we should be the happiest people in the world, and we are far from it. We are over medicated, we are obese, and we're lost, right? In an existential crisis. And I think it's time for everybody to take a look in the mirror and go, how am I complicit in creating this reality? What have I subscribed to that is supporting this reality? But I don't buy into, I don't think humans are that bright. So I have a hard time believing that there is this evil group of masterminds who are all pulling the strings. I think this is easier to describe in human behavior. And and just how humans show up to the game than to think that there is this brilliant group of people who are just truly evil who want to control everyone. But I could be wrong.
It's not super germane to the discussion, other than to recognize where and how this pulse of victimhood has been engendered. So, it's
Do you not think, sorry to interrupt you, but do you think there
no,
are natural, we could say natural maybe, do you not, in studying history, is it hard to see how there were conditions that were created in the world that would have naturally stoked this fire? Like to think things like that in the 70s, women couldn't have a credit card without their husband signing off on it. Now, I get the provider argument from a banking standpoint, but like, what in the fuck? Um, the
yeah,
women
yes, yeah.
vote.
I mean, of course, that's always the retort is like, well, but we couldn't even vote. First of all, I don't vote. I don't I don't mind relinquishing that. Um, we couldn't vote. We couldn't have a bank account. We couldn't have our own property. Like, that's because society was structured to take care of you.
Hmm.
And, we now, so this sort of like hearkening back to the olden times or even the 50s, that's nobody is proposing that. We are at this unique moment now where you don't have to get married, girly. Okay. You don't have to have that baby.
Correct. Or have a
Abort away. Okay. Like, we got all these entitlements, and you can do it your own. You can never have sex with a man if you don't want to. You have totally emancipated yourself, right? You, from your feminine biology, right? Through birth control. And, if you do have a baby, you could have a medicalized birth, you can formula feed, you can take antidepressants to, manage all of those nuisance emotions that might, right? So you can allow yourself to be fully colonized by the hegemony of male values. We've gotten here. We're
totally.
here. There's nowhere to go from. We're here. Okay. I told you I'm at one of the summits of the mountain. I'm telling you what's up here. Okay. And we can choose now to relinquish that electively.
Beautiful.
Right. So when you don't have to get married, but you choose to, here's the kind of man to choose. You choose a provider and a father, or you do it on your own. And I'd go so far as to say, which is really going to make me unpopular with anybody who's a proponent of hookup culture, but I would go so far as to say, to guard your pussy against any man who you don't respect and who cannot offer you that experience of deep admiration, right? Your admiration for him, right? Because not everything is bi-directional, right? The respect and admiration and this recapturing of, masculine leadership and the qualities that actually will make it worth it for you to lay down the sword, right? So a man will make your life easier, or don't give your sexual access to this man, period. Like, this is also a part of, again, what I would call a psyop, you may call a natural evolution, doesn't matter. But this is a part of it, is to suggest that I actually benefit as a woman from sexual liberation, that I benefit from getting to fuck like men, that I benefit from having multiple partners, that I just have hedonistic experiences from. And I totally get that. I used to, of course, subscribe to that and believe that everybody do what the hell they want. And we are not the ones benefiting from that experience. And when we are encouraged to let down our guard for sexual access and to, forget what it is to offer entry, right, to a specific man, then we have participated in the deconstruction of what actually is set up to serve, protect, and make our lives easier, okay, so that we can actually enjoy our experience.
Beautifully said. And I would agree that it is the design protocol. And there's a lot of them that I think that we're going to come back to honoring. But you brought up something I want to hit. My core operating values in this plane of existence, in order, is truth first, love second, and only because I don't think you can have love without truth, freedom, and those three components create community. you said something that to me is entirely the point, which is when you get to elect from a perception of freedom, your choice, you reset the game. And so if this entire last 100 years of just fuckery was simply to remind people
Yeah.
of these deeper truths through the freedom of being able to elect to experience either, it will be well worth it in the evolution of human consciousness. And that alone, to me, makes a great case for why it's happening. Because often you'll see this within cultures. As an executive coach, I work with companies that are going through cultural transition. And you'll see this with whether it's a family dynamic or with an organizational dynamic, this falling away of values because for whatever reason it wasn't passed down effectively, or we could say correctly, or the through line gets missed. And so things start coming up like, well, that's the way we've always done it. And so for me, within my own business, within my family, within my organization, if the phrase "that's the way we've always done it" comes up, it's an immediate red flag. Not that it's inherently wrong, but that we have lost why. And so I think many institutions under attack right now, and I think for good reason, because we've lost our mooring. And so this correctal phase, I think that will bring us back to, in some cases, a more conservative way of looking at the world, but remind us of why these things are important. And we go through these cycles. I don't know if you've read Neil Howe's book, The Fourth Turning. Phenomenal read. I highly recommend.
Cool.
But he basically makes this point of explaining that generations repeat themselves in fours. And he goes back and he's like, and he got my attention because in the late 80s, early 90s, him and his partner wrote a book called Generations and then The Fourth Turning. And they accurately predicted COVID, cryptocurrency, 9/11, and a number of other events that would happen, not in woo-woo and not spiritual, like data-driven, like, hey, these things are likely to happen in the next few decades. So I got a hold of his books, and his argument is, like, human history is continually repeating itself in patterns. And so then I backtest what he was saying. He's like, okay, the last fourth turning was the flapper generation. They dealt with Spanish influenza, World War I, the Depression, and World War II. Go back 80 to 100 years before that, Civil War. 80 to 100 years before that, Revolutionary War. 80 to 100 years before that, French-Indian War. It's like there's this pattern that is repeating itself in generations, and there's resets or a cleaning of the value system that we're using and a reminding, much through pain, why these things are important. But you see it within organizations, you see it within family units. I think even the stage of adolescence and into adulthood is the testing of values to understand which ones are valid, which ones aren't. And I think humanity is going through a big one right now. And I think there are design protocols that we're coming back to and going, wait, these are to our benefit. They're not here to control us, but it's when your position is one of, I get to do this from freedom, it's different. So I think, excuse me, I think I can understand. It's not hard for me to understand how we got here. But I think the returning to a set of values that remind us of what's really important is on its way. And it happens very often through pain. When we give people the freedom, I'm a huge advocate of freedom, which is interesting. But without freedom, we can control people, right? Control is an effective way that governments and organizations and families have ruled forever. The issue is we don't grow in a controlled environment. We grow in freedom. Consciousness grows in freedom when we are given that choice point. And so I think freedom is really messy, which is why we don't like it, right? And even with our kids or our family or an organization, freedom makes us afraid. It makes us scared because there's a lot of messes that come from freedom. But some of the most powerful lessons also come from freedom. And that power to choose, when we feel like it's a choice, not something that is expected of me, we show up different to the party. So if it was expected of a woman, this is how you're supposed to be, and the reasons for being that haven't been passed down, right? There's going to be a lot of challenges or headwind over time. But now if it's coming from your perspective, it's like, no, ladies, like there's a value in this. And trust me, I've done all the things. I know what it's like to experience all these things, and it isn't it. This is it. And now you have the power to choose. Oh, I think that changes the game and empowers the femininity. So I said a lot there, and if you want to comment on it, please do. But I want you to share your handyman story
Oh
because it
yeah.
really brought a tear to my eye.
Oh,
Walking,
me too.
I was walking and listening to you share this, and it's like you hit on such a powerful part of the masculine that is overlooked, and that the masculine genuinely wants to serve the feminine. It is what it's designed to do. It's like you think about wars that happen in the world, and generally the women and children are sent away and the men go fight, and mostly willingly, right? They're willing to do the dangerous jobs. They're willing to put their bodies on the line, and they want to do it. It's part of the design protocol of the masculine to protect and to provide, which is why I think the masculine is in a shitstorm right now, because it's being demeaned for wanting to do exactly what it was designed to do. And so it just touched me. So if you wouldn't mind, I would love if
Oh
you
yeah, happily. Yeah, and the only thing that I would dovetail is about the freedom concept, again, as an activist for all those years, and as somebody who has spoken out about medical freedom to the extent that I landed my pretty name on the disinformation dozen list, iterated by the president.
well
Um,
done there.
I have, well, I mean, I got all sorts of things to say about, activism, but um, I was obsessed with freedom, obsessed. And it's only more recently in my work around, women's actual lived experience and relational experience and how we navigate these roles as career woman, as wife, as mother, um, that I've come to see that actually freedom is not my highest value.
Mm,
And and that's because, I'm a big David Data fan, and, it makes a lot of sense through his lens. He talks about freedom as being the highest value of the masculine, and the highest value of the feminine is love. And I would say, for me, safety, this experience of safety, so that the white noise of vigilance in my system, in my biology, can finally relax, is actually primary. I don't want to be flailing about in the world, like I want to feel that safe container. And, of course, the plot twist has been that I can offer that to myself, and I can learn how to offer that containment to my own system to generate safety in my own body, not because I want to be some automaton out here who never needs anybody, but because that will actually allow me to choose the right man, to choose the right friends, to choose the right situations, to activate a sense of my own know and how to honor it, so that I don't find myself in these dynamics where I'm suppressing that awareness, trying to make something work, and then struggling inside of it. Right. So, um,
and I've heard you
that,
refer to that as self-husbandry, what I thought was a
yeah, yeah,
big
I
term, but
call it, yeah, just tongue
yeah,
in cheek. I call it self-husbanding, because it's like, how would I treat myself, uh, like a devoted husband would? He'd create the conditions for me to always feel comfortable, he'd never put me at some shitty dinner table with people I don't want to be talking to, right? Like, he's not going to whore me out to, force myself to work longer than I want to, or more than I want to. He's going to encourage me to be a woman, right? Um, so yeah, it's been part of the, like, disentangling from those masculine values that has led me to understand that I actually have different priorities, and it's designed that way, right?
100%.
So,
I was going to
you
say
know,
that. So that, and they work together, right? Because
yes.
I think Benjamin Franklin gets credit for saying those who would give up their essential freedom for security deserve neither. And
Mm,
it is the balance, or the interplay of the masculine and the feminine that create those value priorities.
mm,
The masculine being able to show up in freedom creates the container that allows for security and safety. And the masculine can't provide those things without being free, which is a whole other conversation we could run on, and how our society is changing how men show up. Um,
yeah, and I think Data would say, like, a man would only commit, to a woman if he finds greater freedom in his mission and his purpose through her.
100%, which
Yeah.
is, in great freedom is great discipline.
Mhm.
When you can do anything, then you get to choose what you're going to do. And again, it's a choice point and the discipline. A lot of times people confuse freedom with doing whatever you want, and showing up and willy-nilly and capricious and your lifestyle and how you do things and whatever the fleeting moment makes you feel like you want to do. True freedom is the ability to be violent and not. True freedom is the ability to desire something and choose not to. It's discipline, right? That's, I think we have interesting, you use the word love. I think our society has some very convoluted ideas of what real
Oh, what
freedom
that is.
is
Yeah.
and what real love is.
Yeah.
And we're confused on both of those. And so the expressions of what we label freedom and love get lost in translation because we assume freedom means I'm not committed to anything. I do whatever I want. I feel whatever I want, and I express that however I want. And that's not true freedom. The ability to do that is one thing and an important thing, but the discipline of choosing not to, if you can't choose, it's not freedom.
Yeah.
And that's, to me, there's a power in that.
So I'll tell this story. Yeah, before we wrap up. So my handyman has been, as a single woman, I've recognized that there are many things that I am not interested in doing around the house. Okay. Like many things I'm not interested in learning how to fix off a YouTube video, whatever. So he helps me with all, it's like a house husband, like all sorts of things. And so we're chatting and he's telling me about his son who is thinking about, so this man busts his ass. Okay. Like literally, I don't think he takes a day. I don't know that he knows what a day off is. Okay. Like he works real hard and his son has this opportunity to become a welder. And I like know nothing about welding. I don't even know what that means. But apparently it's like a very lucrative like track for,
Great, yeah.
craftsmen, right? Okay. And it's apparently extremely dangerous, right? So he's like thinking about this, but it's also, weighed against the apparently like, morbid risks of, this line of work. And I was like, that's so interesting to hear because in my feminist programming, I got to the point where I really convinced myself that like we don't need men. Like we just don't. We don't. And these days in my Reformation process, I look around and like every building that I see, every structure, every street, like every symbol of the physical, material, societal realm has been built by men, right? Like I am not interested in digging trenches and climbing 5 stories, 10 stories up in the air. Like I walk by a construction site these days and I'm the one like ogling them. Like it's like a total fucking role reversal. And I told him and how much I appreciate this, how much I can really like I walk around feeling deep appreciation for what men do for me in the world, for what they do for us. And how fucking thankless it has been, right? Because you said earlier, like women have suffered for 1,000, so have men. We all have. We all have. Oh, wait, what are we talking about? Some like upper crust of 1% of men who've been in a privileged position? Like we've all been
Yeah.
swirling in suffer and struggle, okay? And and he said, and he looked at me, and we don't normally have like deep conversations, okay? So, but he looked at me and like with all seriousness, he just said, he's like, we do it all for you. And it still makes me tear up. Like there's just something in that moment where
Mm.
I just fucking remembered, like, oh yeah, I can just wake up in the morning, be a woman, right? And I actually can. And this is the ethos I impart to my daughters, like, only ever do what you want. Only ever do what you want. Okay. That's called actually being connected to your divine impulses and trusting your intuition. And know that when your yes and your no are not clear, you are disconnected from your feminine gifts. So you need to know how to read that, right? That yes and that no, and to stick by it and to develop that inner spine, that inner masculine that allows only your yes to be honored as a yes and only your no to be honored as a no. But that's all we got to do. And then we inspire this, like you said, um, this service, in in men, and this like problem solving, right? Like I like to think like I can solve problems better than most men I know. And I've come to understand the way a man's mind works is totally different. Okay. It's like totally different. You will solve a problem totally differently than I will. And I would wager it's a better way, even if, my ability to defend my problem and, rhetorically substantiate my problem might be, in some ways better. I've come to understand that there are basic skills that we are totally complementary in. And I would put in the female column a very large one, which is morality. Like, I actually think that women are the moral compass of this realm, and that men are inspired to, understand and embody morality because and through women. So it's like extremely balanced. Don't worry, ladies, right? Like, it's not like we're putting too many things over in his column. And
I like it.
ultimately, yeah, the reason that, yeah,
There's, I don't know a man that would want to show up in this world without woman. Men don't
yes,
want to hang out on this planet by themselves.
no,
Like and they are inspired by the feminine massively. Like look throughout history, conquering nations, traveling oceans, going up mountains, all in the name of their woman. Like it's like women don't understand how much power they have if they show up in the feminine. The power isn't showing up in the masculine, which is where we started with this. It's
yeah,
like men do not respond to the masculine, especially when it's coming in a feminine frame, but they will conquer nations in the name of the feminine, who shows up in the feminine beauty, in the feminine essence. And it's, we could, argue whether it's good or bad, but I would say societally, women are valued for being, men are valued for doing, and they are different things. Now, I think we can teach men to do from being, which maybe is a layer deep, but men are generally valued in what they do. Women, based on the masculine's point of view, maybe not by feminists, but in the masculine point of view, women are valued for being, their beauty, their art, their essence, the femininity of woman. Men will do whatever they have to for them. And we see it again and again throughout history. So I loved this story, and it was such a potent, when you share it, I was like, that's it. That is the essence of the masculine. It wants to serve the feminine by design. And it wants the feminine to feel sacred and to feel safe and to feel secure. That is, I think, innate. And I loved you called it a natural contract. I don't think I've ever used that framing, but I think it is a beautiful one and an accurate one.
mm.
Well, this has been a lovely conversation. I could easily run with you for hours because there's a lot we didn't get into, and hopefully we'll get another chance to have more conversation.
Yeah, come back. A little dose of me is a good dose.
But I do have a few. I do have a few rapid fire questions, if you don't mind.
Yeah,
First, if you could have a billboard, you live in Miami, somewhere in
I
Florida.
do. Yeah, in Miami.
You could have a billboard in downtown Miami, and it could say whatever you wanted it to say on it. What would it say?
Oh, this is so good. Wow. Well, I might just say my own damn tagline. How about that? I would say, own your body, free your mind, and experience the specific pleasure of who you are.
Mm, I love that one. It's a good one. What we've talked about some of them, so I don't want to give you a layup here. What have you recently changed your mind on?
Let me count the ways. I mean, I have literally, I mean, I have my cat sprawled out all over my freaking desk right now. I used to 3 years ago think cats were so disgusting that I couldn't understand why anybody would ever even touch one, literally.
Oh,
So, I mean, from the big to the small, I actually, my very first podcast I ever recorded on Reclamation Radio on my podcast is called 25 Ways I Have Become the Woman That I Judged.
mm,
And I mean, that's just 25. Like there are many, many, many more where that came from. So clearly I incarnated to play with these polarities. But I would say the biggest and most complex one I'm wrestling with at the moment is what we have touched on, which is uh, that it is a fulfilling choice to prioritize career as specifically as a mother. But I would also say as a wife, because when I look back on the 15 years and, my choice to leave my first marriage, and to destroy, really, for lack of a better word, that possibility of a nuclear family, uh, I can have all sorts of beautiful, legendary love stories in my future, but I can't ever have that again. I can't ever have that. I gave that away. That was a poor bargain, as I say in my book, where I made a deal with the devil and I sold my fucking soul. And I thought, and I gaslit myself the whole time. And I said, I have it all. Look at me being a great mom and loving my job. I literally have the best job in the world. And I told myself, I absolutely love what I do and I would do it for free. All these things that female entrepreneurs say. And at this point, if I could go back and whisper in my ear, and of course, again, no mistakes, this had to be my journey. I really do believe that. I designed it this way. But if I could whisper in my ear, all the things I know about how to make a marriage work as a woman, all the things I know about the capacity for a mother-child relationship to be the closest you'll ever come to intimacy in this human experience, period. And if I could whisper to myself to just put my career on ice for a sweet little decade and a half, right? Uh, and to know that I can still be creative, I can still, explore, I can still learn, I can still do all sorts of things. But if I prioritize my children and my role, and this is like if you had told me this as like somebody who was $200,000 in debt because of my MD, of course I'm going to make good on it. Like, of course I wouldn't have been able to hear it, but I still just wonder, like, what would have happened in my life journey because has it been has it been a lot to work with and manage, and
But
a lot has unfolded because of that decision.
correct me if I'm wrong, because we didn't go into a ton of detail around this, so maybe I'm missing something. But what it sounds like you looking back would have traded back for is what, at least loosely based on our conversation, again, there may be details I'm not aware of, is loosely what your mother had. Am I
Mhm.
wrong in that?
You're not wrong in that.
I find that fascinating.
And it's not right.
How
It's not the exact experience because
could it be for a number?
right. And there were ways like women in her generation. I mean, can I generalize about this? Probably not, but like the trust issues with men, right? That cardinal father wound, that cardinal fear of men. I don't think it was ripe for transformation yet, for maturation yet, right? So like when you are dependent on a man, and I'm not trying to suggest that I know, how she feels necessarily, but like that's kind of the dynamic, right, of that generation of housewife. And I totally understand why she encouraged in me what she did. So no, it wouldn't be the same, but it might look the same. And the values, my dad has a ton of masculine values as provider and protector. And so it would really look very similarly. And that's why I joke with my daughter, my eldest, who's like, super, oh my God. I mean, she just crushes everything she touches. Like she's like number one in the debate team, like number one in this. Like she's just like straight, both of them straight as. And I literally want them like homeschooled doing nothing. Okay. But they're like on this achievement track and I can see it. And I am constantly badgering her. Like, remember, that you can partner wisely and have a totally different experience of your own source of validation, right? It does not have to come through and from your mission and your purpose, because again, as somebody who has enjoyed all, and you could just say, I'm like weird or messed up, or I'm not like other people. No, I am. I'm like a lot of women, okay, where the experience of validation that most of the women in the entrepreneurial space are still trying to get where I've gotten to, right? Like, and not to put myself in some sort of like, you know, again, like superior place, but it's true. If you're struggling in your business and you're like, oh, but once I get to like 100 grand a month, once I get to this, once I get to like that little amount of work, then no, it's not there. I mean, ask any male entrepreneur, is there ever an end point? Do you ever arrive there? No,
Infinite game.
it's the game of like failing well and chasing again. Like that's the male psyche. That is the male value system. And when we play that game, we lose out on the fulfillment that comes from the long-term nourishment of these relational dynamics in our midst. So, when I really chose my own experience of motherhood, I recognized like, oh my God, like this joy has been right in front of me. I mean, it sounds so cliche and it's really true. Like right in front of me the whole time. And I've been looking for something else.
Okay, so to frame this, your mom's experience was different because the masculine energy that she grew up in generationally did not support the freedom you now enjoy. Am I correct? And that's what you're saying?
Yeah, and the sense of internal safety that I do think we are responsible for recapturing as adults, as adult women, right? So that we can in a partnership truly receive, truly trust, truly open to the man in front of us. I mean, that was not just, I don't know, that was available, to women in that generation. It's available to us now.
Why is it available now and not then?
Because we have an understanding that our early life experiences encode a story, not only in our psyches, but in our bodies, and that we can rewrite that story. We can alchemize that story. We can mature beyond poor me, so sad, it's just this way, kind of consciousness. I've talked to people who have had heinous shit happen to them in their childhood, and they're like, "Oh, it didn't affect me that much." And I'm like, the fact that you're saying that is the effect, right? That you have this mercenary, invincible program that says, I am not to be affected. Well, in a woman, that means I am not to be penetrated, right? That means I am not to feel, I'm not to experience, right? It's that armor. And it serves. But now I think we're in a collective zeitgeist where we recognize like, we have all of these tools and resources, and we can change our stories.
I love it. Beautiful. How do you think your children's behavior has been informed by your life? Interesting as you're describing your children, I hear you describing you. I bet you anything your mom would have described you the way you just described both of your children, right?
Yeah. Well, no, they're not like me in that way. They're so far superior in terms of emotional intelligence and their connection to their own inner yes and no. Um, I've just needed to get out of their way
Mm.
in so many dimensions. And it has been the greatest opportunity for me of my life to learn what love actually means, to recognize that my role in their lives is not to teach them how to live. My role in their lives is to, first of all, be inspired by them, which I am on the daily, and also to interest myself in their experience and in their reality. And even that
Ooh,
took nervous system level healing for me, right? As a know-it-all, as an I'll get you to see kind of girl. So I had to do that inner work. Honestly, it's weird, but I had to stop drinking alcohol, which I did a couple of years ago. And I was never had like a problem, like it was always just like a celebratory, recreational, like heart opening experience. I'd have like a mezcal with a girlfriend out at dinner. Um, and there was some connection that when I was inspired, to stop drinking, that I was so much better able to be quiet when my kids were saying something to me that I might not necessarily agree with. And, all you got to do is like look at one of my blogs or read one of my books to know I have a lot of opinions about things, right? Like I think I've figured a lot of shit out. And to not feel that it's my role to impart that information, right? To know better than them about, and they're teenagers, right? So it's different. They're not toddlers. It's very humbling and also has led to like totally exponentially more available intimacy, right? Like I feel that I have a beautiful relationship with my girls, and it's so much fun. Like we have so much fun together. And that was not available to me when I was prioritizing other things. I mean, the other day I was like washing the freaking dishes, okay? I used to go so far out of my way because I have the means self-generated means, to hire like literally people to do everything. Okay. Drive my kids, clean the house, whatever. Why? Because all of that domestic stuff was like, it was like units of productivity that I then, lost. And I can write an email that, makes $50,000. Why am I going to like wash the freaking dishes? Like, I'm not doing that. Right. So that's how a man thinks, I think. I don't know.
I
You
was
tell me.
going to say, you probably dropped in as a dude in more than one lifetime because your description of the masculine thought process is like spot on.
Well, that's why I'm good at teaching women how to mature this, because I have a lot of it, right? So anyway, the other day I was washing dishes, and then I went through a phase where I was like paying my kids. I was like, I'll pay you $5 to like take out the garbage or to do the dishes or whatever. And now I just I do the things. Okay. I drive them, I take out the garbage,
You
I do
find
the
joy in
dishes,
it now?
I cook. And it's a reframe that now I'm like, this is my devotional practice, right? Like this is sweeping the temple. Like
Yeah.
I am here for these girls. And, I'm a zealot about family constellation, which is a modality I talk a lot about. And in family constellation ethos, the parents give to the children don't give to the parents.
Mm, right on.
Right. So if I'm here to give to them, right, to serve them, then yeah, I might be like, hey, can you put your dish in the dishwasher? Or I can just wash their friggin' dish and actually find that to be like a means of honoring, this connection. That whole dimension is not available when you are prioritizing your work, because all that stuff is getting in the way of your work. Right. So that shift has just been a colossal one. And I don't have any women I can talk to about this, to be honest, who relate,
Maybe.
and I imagine, the women who work with you and, even the women on my own team, like this, I feel like, I get it, right? Because if me now had talked to me a year ago, I wouldn't have wanted to have this conversation, right? But like this transition, it's very confusing and it's very uncomfortable. And so it have very long answer to your question about like, one thing I've changed my mind on is like, and I put this in on the social media post the other day. It's like, if you choose to marry, like honor and respect your man enough to provide for you, and if you choose to have children, then be a mother.
Hmm. How have you learned to sexually transmute your energy? You talk a lot about this eroticism, erotic energy, feminine energy. Um, to me, sexual energy is a spiritual expression. I would say sexual energy is the physical dimension of our spiritual reality, or a portal to it. And it is a creative energy. And when I was 11 years old, I read Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And it was a great remembering at a perfect time in my life when I realized the power of my sexual essence and being able to use that to create in the world beyond children, but to create in the world and to focus and transmute it. I heard, yeah, on a podcast, I don't know if it's still relevant. You could share to whatever degree you want, but because I don't know when the podcast went up, but you had just exclaimed that you had been celibate for 3 years. For a woman in her prime, that seems pretty intense, but also incredibly powerful. So no doubt you've learned to express your sexual energy in other creative ways. It's probably created a lot of potent result for you. I get this question by men and women a lot. However, I think sexual energy for men is a different, I could be wrong because I'm not a woman in this lifetime and have no recollection of it, but I think it's a different energy, or maybe a different polarity of the same energy. And so I have a hard time answering that for women who are in that boat. And I get it. That question comes up quite a bit. I'm celibate either by choice or not choice. I have the sexual expression, the sexual energy I don't know what to do with. And I try to teach transmutation, but I have a hard time teaching that to the feminine because I think it potentially has a different outcome. For the masculine, it's a giving energy by nature, right? And it creates in a different kind of potency. Could you speak to the feminine version of that? Because I thought that was a really powerful thing, and I love your work and talk around that. And there's a lot of things related to that I thought would be interesting to get into.
Oh my God, this is such a great topic. We're gonna have to do a part two.
Okay.
Uh, but and I'll just briefly say that yes, that is all accurate. I have, as somebody who probably regulated myself through sex for my entire, I've been partnered my entire life since I was like literally 14. I've had a partner and with no gaps. Okay. So I never,
Fourteen.
yeah, I didn't start having sex at 14, but like, I
I mean,
probably
you
in
said
my,
you were partnered
I
up.
always had like a serial monogamous, let's put it that way. And
Understood. Yep.
I probably didn't go a week of my life without having sex. I mean, it was just a huge part of um, my lifescape. And now that I look at it, I see how I was like neuro-regulating, like literally, through my relationship to sexuality. And of course, when you're partnered in that way, your own self pleasuring practice tends to atrophy. So you don't have a well cultivated sense of self. So in my celibate years, I have come to know my body very, very well. This is something I'm always harping on with my daughters too. I'm like, do this body mapping exercise now. You need to know now about your body. Don't wait until your 40s. Like that's crazy. And the concept of erotic artistry, which is like, making love to my whole life, really has become a lifestyle, right? So how do I prioritize my own sensual pleasure, right? So that starts with honoring my biological impulses, right? So like knowing if I have to pee, I get up and pee. If my feet are cold, I put socks on. If I'm thirsty, I drink, right? So listening and starting to open up that dialogue with my own body's needs. It then extends to creative and like sensual preferences, right? So I might be home totally alone and I'll put on the essential oil diffuser and I'll put, on, these particular lights that I like to have on. And I always have fairy lights everywhere because I love, their glow and just prioritizing like what feels, um, to my senses stimulating and exciting. And that leads to a life where my felt experience matters, first of all. And I prioritize working with emotional alchemy, which is largely the subject of my last book. And I get to reap the creative benefits, right? So then I get all of this inspiration. I mean, in my celibate window, I've learned how to sing. Okay, never thought that was coming. I have learned multiple different forms of dance, including, pole and partner dance that I never saw myself pursuing. I've learned how to sew, garden. I have, I've taken up all sorts of things that I believe are a direct result of my vital force. Because as you said, you know, our sexual energy is we come from sex. It is a creative, procreative energy. Okay. So it is one and the same, in my opinion, with our vital force. And so when that is sublimated to some extent, when that is directed, like, through my own vessel, it's just a different experience of one's own vitality. And, like for women, it's totally different. I mean, I wouldn't pretend to know how this applies to men. But, if after like a month or two of, not having actual partnered sex like in your life, it's like we're okay. Like it's okay. Actually okay. Which I imagine is different. I imagine it's different, for men.
Yeah. Well, there's a design imperative, and we're well over on time, and I'd love to continue this conversation, but I also
I
want to
know.
honor your time. So we should do a part two. But
Sure.
I do think I think there is differences, and I think there's a beauty in that too. But there is a creative force to both, and learning how to discipline and direct that energy. I use the word sexual alchemy and emotional alchemy regularly in my practice, and learning how to take that energy force and use it And so I'm a big fan of The Way of the Superior Man. It's one of the books I recommend. You
Yes.
mentioned David Data earlier. So I thought his teaching was spot on in that area. But
Yeah.
I think it's teaching how to bring those two together. How does the masculine sit independent, feminine sit independent, and define those, and then bringing them together in the divine dance, which to me is the divine design of the human experience. Right? And part of the sandbox we get to play in is to fuck it up and see how it works and how it doesn't work. And I think humans are doing an adequate job of doing that. But we can come back to these remembrances. And I think the best way to lead is by example, to model the change you want to see in the world by teaching from your experiential knowledge. And I think that's so much of why I appreciate what you're bringing to the world, because I can hear it and I can feel the integrated knowledge that is your life. Like these are experiences you've lived. And I love that you're sitting on a mountaintop going, guys, it's not up here. What you want is not up here, I promise. And maybe it is for some women. Maybe there are exceptions to that. But I can tell you, at least anecdotally in my own practice, the women that come to me are in the same thing. They're like, I have what the world tells me I should have to be happy, and it isn't it. And there are things that I want that I don't even know how to get to right now.
Yeah.
So, well, we'll set up a part two because there's a lot of questions I didn't get to, and I'd love to continue this conversation. But thank you so much for your time today. This has been awesome. Your book, Reclaim Woman, is out, right?
Chiz. Yes.
And where can people find you? Where's the best place to find you? Again, my audience would probably love to connect with you just based on our conversation here. People are looking for coaching or one-on-one or group coaching or anything to just kind of help navigate this as a woman, a career woman who's looking to get back to their feminine. Where can they find you? How can you help
Yeah.
them?
Yeah. So, unlike my earlier books with health protocols, which you can essentially do and people have on their own, I am a big believer that women need to do this work with other women, and that men need to do their own work with other men. And
100% agree. There are things
yeah,
that's served by yeah. Anyway,
yeah, and that this isn't a mercenary path because you'd be running the same program that got you into this position. So yeah, I have created a container for the book. It's a program where you operationalize the book called Reclaimed, and all that is available over at kellybroganmd.com.
Sweet. Well, I'm excited to direct my followers and community members to you on that topic. And I look forward to having a part two at some point.
Amazing. Total pleasure.
Thank you, Kelly. It was great
Thank you.
chatting
Thank
with you today.
you.